July 18, 1942. Rechlin, Germany. Messerschmitt Me 262 prototype completes first full jet-powered flight reaching 520 km per hour, 160 km per hour faster than any operational Allied fighter. Test pilot Fritz Wendell reports aircraft handles beautifully, acceleration is extraordinary, and performance exceeds all expectations. Luftwaffe Test Center engineers calculate Me 262 operational deployment by spring 1943, if production begins immediately. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring watches demonstration, then declares, "Finally, an aircraft that will sweep Allied bombers from German skies." But Me 262 doesn't enter combat until September 1944, 26 months after successful test flight. By then, 1,400 Allied bombers attack Germany daily, escorted by 1,000 fighters. Luftwaffe fields 40 operational Me 262s against this armada. The technological advantage that could have changed air war in 1943 arrives in 1944, when outcome is already decided. Post-war Allied technical intelligence teams examine captured German aviation industry documents, seeking explanation for catastrophic delay. Report titled "Delay in German Jet Aircraft Development: Contributing Factors and Strategic Consequences" compiled by U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concludes Me 262 operational deployment delayed minimum 2 years by 3 factors: Hitler's interference demanding bomber conversion delaying fighter production 14 months, material shortages from Allied bombing disrupting engine production, and bureaucratic conflicts between Luftwaffe, Aviation Ministry, and Nazi Party leadership preventing coordinated development. The report's conclusion: had Me 262 entered service spring 1943 as technically feasible, Luftwaffe could have contested Allied air superiority 1943-1944, potentially extending war 6 to 12 months and increasing Allied bomber casualties by 40%. Instead, technological breakthrough arrives too late to matter strategically. Germany possessed jet fighter technology 2 years before operational deployment. Textbook case of strategic opportunity wasted through political interference and bureaucratic dysfunction. The secret report proves Germany's jet fighters failed not from technical limitations, but from leadership failure preventing timely deployment. 1939-1941. German aviation engineers develop world's first operational jet engines while Allied designers remain focused on piston technology. Messerschmitt AG and Heinkel both pursue jet fighter designs using turbojet engines developed by BMW and Junkers. Hans-Joachim Pabst von Ohain, 28 years old in 1939, designs his 3-engine powering Heinkel He-178, world's first jet aircraft, which flies August 27, 1939. Meanwhile, Dr. Anselm Franz leads Junkers team developing Jumo 004 engine specifically for fighter application. By 1941, Junkers 004 produces 900 kilograms thrust, sufficient for high-performance fighter. Messerschmitt designer Waldemar Voigt creates Me 262 airframe optimized for jet propulsion, swept wings reducing drag at high speed, twin-engine layout providing safety redundancy, and tricycle landing gear enabling better visibility. First prototype flies April 1941, using piston engine while jet engines undergo refinement. July 1942. Me 262 achieves successful all-jet flight demonstrating revolutionary capabilities. Test results confirm aircraft reaches 870 km per hour maximum speed, 220 km per hour faster than RAF Spitfire 9 or American P-51 Mustang. Acceleration, 0 to 750 km per hour in 3 minutes versus 5 minutes for piston fighters. Service ceiling, 11,500 meters versus 9,700 meters for Allied fighters. Armament, 430 mm cannons delivering devastating firepower against bombers. Luftwaffe fighter pilots reviewing performance data calculate single Me 262 equals 3 conventional fighters in combat effectiveness. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, 30 years old, decorated fighter ace with 94 victories, test flies Me 262 November 1942. His assessment: this aircraft opens completely new tactical possibilities. It's like flying with angels pushing. I urge immediate mass production. Galland recommends 1,000 Me 262s operational by summer 1943 to counter growing Allied bomber offensive. But Luftwaffe command structure in 1942 reflects bureaucratic chaos undermining effective decision-making. Hermann Göring, 49 years old, commands Luftwaffe, but increasingly defers to Hitler on strategic decisions while managing political intrigues. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, 50 years old, State Secretary of Aviation Ministry, oversees aircraft production, but conflicts constantly with Göring. General Oberst Ernst Judith, responsible for aircraft procurement until his suicide November 1941, created procurement chaos prioritizing competing designs without strategic coordination. This leadership dysfunction means Me 262 development proceeds without clear priority or production timeline despite obvious technological superiority. Multiple competing jet projects, Heinkel He 280, Arado R234, fragment resources and attention. No single authority coordinates jet fighter program with strategic urgency. The revolutionary technology exists, but organizational structure cannot convert technical success into operational capability. What the Germans don't know yet makes this bureaucratic paralysis even more devastating. British intelligence receives reports of German jet development through various sources including aerial reconnaissance of test facilities and communications intercepts. But what the Germans don't realize is that Allied bombing priorities in 1943 specifically target ball bearing plants, aircraft assembly facilities, and synthetic fuel production, precisely the industrial infrastructure necessary for Me 262 mass production. While Germans debate Me 262's role and production priority during 1942-1943, Allied planners identify and systematically attack the supply chains that will later throttle jet fighter production. The window for Me 262 strategic impact exists in 1943, before Allied bombing campaign devastates German aviation industry. But bureaucratic delays and political interference ensure Me 262 enters production exactly when industrial capacity collapses. Göring presents Me 262 to Hitler May 1943, during demonstration at Insterburg. Hitler, 54 years old and increasingly detached from military reality, watches jet fighter perform high-speed passes. His first question: can this aircraft carry bombs? Göring hesitates. Me 262 designed as interceptor, not bomber. Hitler interrupts. I see this aircraft as Blitzbomber, lightning bomber to strike Allied invasion forces. Convert it immediately to bomber role. His reasoning: Allied invasion of Western Europe appears imminent. Germany needs fast bomber to attack landing beaches. Me 262's speed prevents fighter interception. Göring objects weakly that fighter role is primary mission. Hitler overrides him. Every new aircraft must serve as bomber first. That is my order. This single decision, converting Me 262 from interceptor to bomber, delays operational deployment approximately 14 months as engineers redesign aircraft structure, bomb release mechanisms, and flight characteristics for ground attack role. May-December 1943. Me-262 program fragments into competing priorities as Hitler's bomber conversion demand conflicts with Luftwaffe fighter requirements. Messerschmitt engineers begin redesigning Me-262 for bomb-carrying role requiring structural reinforcements, bomb rack installations, and revised flight control systems. But Galland and fighter commanders continue pressing for interceptor version, arguing Allied bomber offensive represents immediate threat requiring fighter response. Germany lacks authority structure to resolve conflict. Hitler demands bomber, Galland demands fighter. Göring vacillates between positions. Milch focuses on production numbers without strategic clarity. Result: development resources scatter across multiple Me-262 variants without coherent production priority. Me-262A1A interceptor, Me-262A2A bomber, Me-262B1A night fighter. Each version requires separate tooling, testing, and production lines. The unified focus necessary for rapid deployment dissolves into competing programs. At this exact moment, 1,800 kilometers west, Allied bombing campaign intensifies, precisely targeting German aviation industry. August 17, 1943. 376 B-17 bombers attack Regensburg Messerschmitt plant and Schweinfurt ball bearing factories. October 14, 1943. 291 B-17s strike Schweinfurt again, destroying 37% of ball-bearing production capacity. These raids devastate infrastructure necessary for Me-262 production. Ball bearings, essential for jet engine turbines, become critically scarce. Messerschmitt assembly facilities suffer bombing damage requiring reconstruction. Subcontractor plants producing components experience repeated attacks disrupting supply chains. Me-262 production schedule slips from Galland's proposed summer. 1943. Operational date to September. 1943. Then December. 1943. Then March. 1944. Each delay reflects not technical problems, but industrial disruption from Allied bombing and organizational chaos from Hitler's conflicting demands. December 1943. Milch convenes conference attempting to resolve Me-262 production crisis. Participants include Messerschmitt representatives, Luftwaffe commanders, aviation ministry officials, and Nazi Party production coordinators. Milch presents data. Me-262 technical development complete, production tooling ready. But three obstacles prevent mass production. Hitler's bomber requirement demands design changes, material shortages from Allied bombing limit engine production to 25 monthly versus 100 required, and workforce shortages from military conscription reduce assembly capacity. Milch proposes compromise. Produce 50 Me-262 fighters monthly starting January 1944, while developing bomber variants separately. But conference devolves into bureaucratic conflict. Göring insists Hitler's bomber priority remains absolute. Galland demands immediate fighter production regardless of Hitler's orders. Party officials complain insufficient resources allocated versus other wonder weapons like V-2 rockets. Conference ends without resolution. Me-262 production remains paralyzed by competing demands and organizational dysfunction. What happens in the next 6 months demonstrates how bureaucratic chaos transforms technological advantage into strategic irrelevance. January-June 1944. Allied bombing reaches maximum intensity. Operation Argument Big Week February 1944. Targets aviation industry with 6,000 bomber sorties. Messerschmitt plants at Regensburg and Augsburg suffer major damage. Junkers engine factories experience repeated attacks. Ball bearing production drops 67% from 1943 levels. Synthetic fuel plants, supplying special jet fuel, become priority targets April 1944. This systematic industrial destruction occurs precisely as Me-262 finally receives production priority. Milch authorizes mass production March 1944, 21 months after successful test flight. But industrial infrastructure to support production is collapsing. Engine production achieves 50 units monthly versus 200 required. Airframe assembly struggles, reaching 30 monthly versus 100 targeted. Skilled workers drafted into military cannot be replaced. Aircraft assembly increasingly uses forced labor lacking training and motivation. May 1944. Galland finally convinces Göring to overrule Hitler's bomber conversion. Fighters desperately needed to counter Allied daylight bombing destroying German cities and industry. Göring presents request to Hitler, authorize Me-262 production as fighter. Hitler refuses, my standing order, all new aircraft must carry bombs. Me-262 remains Blitzbomber. Göring lacks courage to challenge Hitler directly. Galland circumvents Hitler's order through semantic deception, officially designates Me-262 as bomber, actually produces fighter variant, plans to deploy as interceptor regardless of Hitler's intentions. This bureaucratic subterfuge works, but consumes additional months. Me-262A1A fighter variant finally enters production June 1944. 24 months after successful test flight, 12 months after proposed operational date, and exactly when Allied invasion of Normandy begins. The jet fighter designed to prevent Allied air superiority arrives when Allied air superiority is absolute. June-August 1944. First operational Me-262 unit, Oprobungs Commando 262, Testing Command 262, forms at Lechfeld with 10 aircraft. Commander Major Walter Nowotny, 23 years old, decorated fighter ace with 258 victories, begins combat trials determining optimal tactics. Initial results prove Me-262's devastating potential. Speed advantage allows pilots to choose engagement conditions. Armament destroys bombers with single burst. Allied fighters cannot intercept during attack runs. But operational challenges emerge immediately. Engines require replacement after the 25th of October flight hours, versus 300 hours for piston engines, due to metallurgy limitations from material shortages. Takeoff and landing speeds are very high, making aircraft vulnerable during approach. Allied fighters learn to patrol German airfields, attacking Me-262s during vulnerable landing phase. Fuel consumption exhausts supplies, quickly limiting sortie duration. Each Me-262 sortie requires extensive ground crew support, specialized maintenance personnel in critically short supply. September 1944. Hitler finally acknowledges Me-262 fighter role after Göring admits aircraft performs better as interceptor. By then, Luftwaffe fields approximately 40 operational Me-262s facing 1,400 Allied bombers and 1,000 escort fighters daily over Germany. The numerical disparity makes strategic impact impossible regardless of technological superiority. Commando Nowotny achieves first confirmed Me-262 victories. September 28, Nowotny shoots down 2 B-24 bombers. October 7, unit destroys 4 bombers. But Allied countermeasures develop rapidly. P-51 Mustangs patrol Me-262 airfields, destroying jets during landing. Bomber formations tighten defensive tactics, and numerical superiority ensures losses are sustainable. November 8, 1944. Nowotny is killed when his damaged Me-262 is attacked by P-51s during emergency landing. illustrating aircraft's tactical vulnerability despite speed advantage. The wonder weapon that could have changed air war in 1943 achieves tactical victories, but strategic irrelevance in 1944. October-December 1944. Me-262 production increases as factories disperse to underground facilities escaping bombing. Monthly production reaches 100 aircraft by October, 150 by November, 200 by December. But operational deployment lags far behind production. Pilot training, maintenance facilities, fuel supplies, and spare parts remain critically inadequate. Germany produces approximately 1,400 Me-262s total, but fewer than 300 enter combat service. Remainder sit idle for lack of fuel, pilots, or maintenance support. Jagdflieger 44, elite jet fighter unit commanded by Galland after his removal as General der Jagdflieger, operates 40 Me-262s April 1945. Achieving kill ratio of 5-to-1 against Allied aircraft. But 40 jets cannot contest 3,000 Allied aircraft over Germany. Post-war analysis calculates Me-262 units destroyed approximately 150 Allied aircraft while losing 100 jets in combat, respectable tactical exchange, but strategically meaningless against Allied numerical superiority. The strategic consequences of 2-year delay manifest in catastrophic air superiority failure. Allied bombing campaign 1943-1944 operates virtually unopposed, destroying German industrial capacity, transportation networks, and synthetic fuel production. February 1945. 6,000 tons of bombs fall on Dresden in 2 days. March 1945. 7,000 bombers strike oil facilities. April 1945. Transportation system collapses from systematic interdiction. Had Me-262 entered service spring 1943. With 500 operational aircraft, technically achievable based on development timeline, Luftwaffe could have contested air superiority through 1943-1944. Post-war Allied Technical Intelligence Report calculates scenarios, with 500 Me-262s operational mid-1943. Allied bomber losses would increase from 5% to 9% per mission, making daylight bombing economically unsustainable, forcing Allied air commanders to reduce mission frequency or shift to night bombing, reducing accuracy. 3 factors now converge to demonstrate how 2-year delay transformed potential strategic weapon into tactical curiosity: insufficient numbers from delayed production, operational limitations from inadequate support infrastructure, and overwhelming Allied numerical superiority by 1944. First factor: numbers. Germany produces 1,400 Me-262s total, versus Galland's 1943 proposal for 1,000 operational by summer 1943. But 1944. Production occurs when industrial infrastructure is collapsing. Many aircraft never reach operational units due to transportation disruption. Those reaching units often lack engines, fuel, or ammunition. Operational availability rate 30%, meaning only 90 of 300 frontline aircraft typically flyable on any given day. Second factor: support infrastructure. Jet engines require specialized maintenance impossible to provide with undertrained personnel and limited spare parts. Average engine life 12 to 25 hours, requiring frequent replacement. Fuel requirements: special J2 synthetic fuel from plants under constant bombing attack. And then the technical advantage proves inadequate against numerical overwhelming force. December 1944. April 1945. Despite Me-262 technological superiority, Allied air forces operate with impunity over Germany. Third factor, numerical disparity. Luftwaffe fields maximum 200 operational jets simultaneously, facing 15,000 Allied combat aircraft including 6,000 fighters. Exchange ratio even at 5-1 in Germany's favor means 40 Allied aircraft lost for 200 German jets destroyed. Acceptable loss rate for Allies, catastrophic for Germany. Me-262 units inflict local tactical victories, but cannot prevent strategic bombing campaign. Allied commanders accept Me-262 threat as manageable operational problem rather than strategic game-changer. General Karl Spaatz, commanding U.S. Strategic Air Forces Europe, writes January 1945. German jets represent technical achievement, but arrive too late and too few to affect strategic outcome. The human cost of technological advantage squandered through political interference manifests in bomber crew casualties that could have been prevented. Allied Bomber Command loses 15,000 aircraft over Germany. 1943-1945. With 150,000 crew casualties. Post-war analysis estimates Me-262 deployment in 1943 would increase Allied losses by 40% through 1943-1944. Additional 6,000 aircraft and 60,000 casualties, potentially forcing modification of strategic bombing campaign. Instead, 2-year delay ensures Me-262 enters combat when Allied numerical superiority absorbs losses without operational impact. German pilots flying Me-262s experience frustration of technological superiority without strategic relevance. Major Heinz Barr, Me-262 ace with 16 jet victories, testifies post-war, "We had superior aircraft, but criminal delays meant we received them when war was already lost." In 1943, 500 Me-262s could have changed everything. In 1945, 500 jets meant nothing against 5,000 Allied fighters. The secret report compiled by U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1945-1946, examines captured German aviation documents revealing exact timeline of Me-262 delays. Report identifies critical decision points where different choices would enable earlier deployment. July 1942. Test flight. Immediate production authorization enables operational deployment. April 1943. May 1943. Hitler bomber conversion order delays deployment from April 1943 to September 1944. Approximately 17 months. Allied bombing campaign 1943-1944 destroys 60% of potential Me-262 production capacity. Bureaucratic conflicts between Göring, Milch, and Galland fragments development resources, delaying production 6 months. Report's conclusion section titled Strategic Consequences of Me-262 Deployment Delay calculates, had Me-262 entered service April 1943, with 500 operational aircraft and achieved sustainable production of 200 monthly, Luftwaffe would have contested Allied air superiority through 1944, potentially extending European war 6 to 12 months and increasing Allied bomber casualties 40%. The mathematics proving Me-262 arrived 2 years too late emerges from production timeline analysis. Technical readiness. July 1942. After successful test flight. Earliest possible operational deployment with production authorization. April 1943. 9 months for tooling, testing, and initial production run. Actual operational deployment, September 1944. 26 months after technical readiness. Delay causes, Hitler bomber conversion, 14 months, material shortages, 6 months, bureaucratic conflicts, 6 months. Total delay, 26 months equals approximately 2 years. Strategic window for impact, 1943. Early, 1944. Before Allied air superiority becomes absolute. Actual deployment, late, 1944. After Allied air superiority established. Result, technological advantage without strategic relevance. British Air Ministry Intelligence Assessment, December 1944. Concludes, German Me-262 represents impressive technical achievement arriving too late to matter. Had this aircraft appeared in strength, 1943, RAF Bomber Command would have faced unsustainable losses requiring operational modification. The immediate strategic consequence of Me-262's delayed deployment extends beyond lost air superiority to industrial devastation that could have been contested. Allied bombing campaign, 1943-1945. Drops, 2.7 million. Tons of bombs on Germany destroying, 3.6 million. Homes, killing 600,000 civilians, and reducing industrial production 80% from 1943. Perks. This destruction proceeds virtually unopposed during 1943-1944, when Me-262 sits in development paralyzed by political interference. Post-war German aviation industry analysis concludes timely Me-262 deployment wouldn't prevent Germany's ultimate defeat, but would significantly increase cost and duration. Estimated impact, Allied bomber losses increasing from 5% to 9% per mission. 1943-1944. Would force operational modifications, reduced mission frequency, increased fighter escort, shift to night operations, decreasing bombing effectiveness 30 to 40% and potentially extending war 6 to 12 months with corresponding increase in total casualties all sides. If German leadership had prioritized Me-262 fighter production, 1942-1943. Military analysts calculate alternative scenarios. Scenario 1. Immediate production authorization July 1942. After successful test flight, 500 Me-262s operational by April 1943. Sustainable production 200 monthly through 1943. Result, Luftwaffe contests Allied daylight bombing with jet interceptors forcing Allied operational modifications. Strategic bombing campaign delayed or reduced in effectiveness. Air superiority remains contested through 1944. Scenario 2. Hitler authorizes fighter production without bomber conversion May 1943. Me-262 operational by September 1943. With 300 aircraft. Result, partial air superiority contestation, increased Allied losses, but not enough to prevent bombing campaign. Scenario 3. Historical reality with production beginning 1944. Result, Me-262 arrives too late to affect strategic outcome. Post-war analysis consensus. Scenarios 1 and 2 extend war, but don't prevent Allied victory, technological advantage without industrial capacity and numerical superiority insufficient to change strategic trajectory. The fate of Me-262 program symbolizes larger pattern of German wonder weapon programs that consumed resources without strategic impact. V-2 rocket program absorbs enormous resources, producing 3,000 missiles killing 7,000 people, resources that could have produced 24,000 fighters. Tiger tank programs prioritize expensive heavy tanks versus mass-produced medium tanks, reducing overall armor numbers. Each program reflects Hitler's fascination with technological superiority over operational practicality. Me-262 represents technologically superior weapon system undermined by political interference, bureaucratic dysfunction, and strategic timing failure. Post-war German military analysis by Galland concludes, Me-262 delay exemplifies how National Socialist leadership structure prevented effective military decision-making. Had rational military priorities prevailed over Hitler's personal interference, jet fighters operational 1943 would have significantly impacted air war. Instead, technological triumph became strategic irrelevance through criminal delays. Remember July 18, 1942, when Me-262 prototype demonstrated revolutionary jet fighter capabilities reaching 520 km per hour, 160 km per hour faster than any Allied fighter. Remember test pilot Fritz Wendell reporting performance exceeded all expectations with operational deployment possible by spring 1943. Remember Hitler's May 1943 order converting Me-262 to bomber, delaying fighter production 14 months. Remember Allied bombing campaign 1943-1944 systematically destroying aviation industry infrastructure necessary for Me-262 mass production. Remember bureaucratic conflicts between Göring, Milch, and Galland fragmenting development resources and delaying production decisions. Remember Me-262 finally entering combat September 1944, 26 months after technical readiness, when Allied air superiority was absolute with 1,400 bombers and 1,000 fighters over Germany daily facing 40 operational German jets. This is the secret report that proved Germany's jet fighters were 2 years too late, technological breakthrough squandered through political interference and organizational dysfunction, transforming potential strategic weapon into tactical curiosity without strategic impact. The statistics quantify how technological superiority without timely deployment equals strategic irrelevance. Me-262 development timeline. First jet flight July 1942. Operational deployment September 1944. 26-month delay. Total production 1,400 aircraft. Operational deployment. Fewer than 300 aircraft reached combat units. Maximum simultaneous operations. 200 Me-262's operational peak strength March 1945. Allied opposition. 15,000 combat aircraft including 6,000 fighters over Germany spring 1945. Me-262 combat record. Approximately 150 Allied aircraft destroyed, 100 Me-262s lost in combat, respectable 1.5 to 1 exchange ratio, but strategically meaningless against overwhelming numbers. Allied bomber losses 1943-1945. 15,000 aircraft total, 5% average loss rate. Post-war calculations estimate Me-262 deployment April 1943, with 500 aircraft would increase Allied loss rates to 9% through 1944, making strategic bombing economically unsustainable. American historian Edward Yablonsky writes, Me-262 represents classic case of right weapon at wrong time. 2-year delay transformed strategic game-changer into technological footnote. British aviation historian Alfred Price states, had Me-262 entered service 1943, as technically possible, Allied bomber offensive would have faced crisis requiring fundamental operational revision. Today, aerospace industry case studies examine Me 262 as definitive lesson in technology development timing and political interference consequences. At NASA and defense contractors, program managers study how Hitler's personal intervention delayed Me 262 deployment, illustrating danger of political micromanagement in technical programs. At military staff colleges, Me 262 demonstrates technological superiority cannot compensate for numerical inferiority and strategic timing failures. Modern defense acquisition doctrine incorporates lessons: maintain clear command authority for weapons development decisions, prevent political interference in technical timelines, prioritize operational deployment speed over perfect technical refinement. The 1991 F-117 stealth fighter deployment, operational within 8 years of program start, reflects Me 262 lessons about rapid development cycles. Modern military doctrine emphasizes technology deployed is worth 10 times technology in development. Direct application of Me 262's strategic failure. Hitler's 2-year delay of Me 262 stands as eternal cautionary tale. Revolutionary technology arriving too late equals technology that never existed. Germany possessed operational jet fighter 2 years before deployment, and lost those 2 years to political interference and bureaucratic chaos. The secret report proves strategic opportunity wasted costs more than technology never developed. Me 262's legacy, technological marvel remembered primarily for epitomizing too little, too late.